Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to cover a topic that I have done in the past, I realised, but I've forgotten what I said in that video, so I'll go through a bit of the basics, but I want to tackle it a little bit differently. And the question is, how do you cab with a Dremel? How do we carve a cab essentially? Now, I will put a little bit of a warning in. Carving is not designed to cab particularly well. So it is quite difficult to get a nice finished cab. And today I'll show you on this Andamooka some of the traps that we fall into, because I don't mind abusing this stone. It's a little stone that Riley sent over. That's Riley Gunn, 53 Frogs on Opal Auctions and NN Opals here on YouTube. Does some great videos. Definitely worth checking out. So with this poor little stone, I'm going to absolutely torture it and show you what to do, what not to do, all that kind of stuff. And I chose this stone in particular because the white stone appears quite well on camera, and this is an untreated matrix opal. It's got a bit of color, a bit of like crystally color on the backside here, but it's mostly just this pretty standard sandstone. You can see here the opal is all in the pores over here, but there's a little bit of crust. So that's one of the first things you need to look at. You're looking at your rough piece, and it is a lot easier if it's already flattened on one side. You can see here, that's where the saw has run over this Andamooka. Most of the time, you're not going to have that, but typically you've got potch on both sides of a bar you're going for. Just flatten one out, and number one step is to mark out all the stuff you don't want. That's the sand over on this crusty edge just here. That's not matrix opal. And slap on a stencil. So I've got a whole bunch of ovals here. You can have a look, just line them up, work out exactly the area you want, which size you can fit in there. We might just sneak this one in. Otherwise we'll have to go here, but who knows? We might as well just start trying with this one. Make sure you're not getting any of those sandy areas that we don't want. That's up over this top corner. And remember, the stencil is pretty great, but the thicker the marker you use, the thicker your line's going to be, and then you're going to need to decide whether you need to cut off the line or leave the line on. Here I'm using the finer end of a Sharpie, and we'll just zap that around, do it a couple times. Sometimes I use a pencil, it depends on the stone, but because this is a pretty white matrix, we're just going to use a black marker. And then there you go. You can see that this one's gone a little bit too far into the sand. Not a huge problem, you can always mark it again. Wipe this off with isopropanol. This just gives you an idea of what you're going to do, and typically if I'm using a fine liner, I'm going to cut right up to the edge. If I'm going to use a thick liner, sometimes I'll go into the edge. It depends. If I was using a thick marker, which I could do now, you'll see that this little sandy spot here will be covered up, and then we might just cut all the way through the marker, through to the inner circle. So there you go. I've just wiped off a little bit of that with some isopropanol just to make the line a little bit fainter. You'll be able to clearly see which one's which. And now you can see that the sand is all fully cut out and we should be good to go. This oval is a little ambitious because if we look at this side of the stone, you can see the sand tapers in a little bit. And so we're probably going to clip into this sand edge here, but that's okay, we can tackle that later. Doesn't need to be perfect, you can always stencil on something smaller after. Remember, you can always cut more material, but you can't bring it back. So what we're going to do now is grab the sintered diamond burr, and we're just going to take off all of that area and just leave our center core here. And for that, we are going to use a beefy burr. So I have these ones here, you can see that little black band. These are the coarsest sintered diamonds that I've got. They're about an 80 grit from the US standard, and these will chew material like you wouldn't believe. Matrix is actually pretty easy to chew up as well. So I've got the smaller versions in the assorted kit, so there are a couple 80s in there, all the way through to 600s, but for now we're not going to worry about any of these. It cuts way too slowly. We're just going to go with these sintered diamonds. If you don't have sintered diamonds, you can use electroplated. They will burn out really quickly, but believe it or not, they cut a lot faster because the diamonds are on the outside, not impregnated into the metal, and it makes them super abrasive. It'll turn this to dust real quickly. And speaking of dust, definitely need to wear a mask if you're cutting dry, but I always say cut wet, and I still wear a mask most of the time anyway. Especially with the coarse, heavy grinding, where I'm going to get rid of all of this, because every now and then it can dry a little bit, and I don't want to risk getting any of that in the old lungs. So let me get the tub and give this a bit of a scrub. Alright, so not overly interesting this section. So the rough removal, we're just going to cut straight down to that line. We'll look at it more closely when we get nearer, but I'll skip forwards a bit. I want to mostly focus on tips and tricks that we use for using Dremel stuff to be able to do this. So this is the first one. When you're doing the finer shaping, I decided to go into the texture line because of some sand on the edges. It traveled in a little bit far like we expected. So I'm carving it all the way in. You'll notice here from the side on view, I'm doing that front edge first. The back and middle will actually follow afterwards. So what I'm going to do now is line it up so that you're perpendicular to the face, and we're just going to bring that in to where the front edge is sitting. It just seems to be a little bit easier this way. We've got such small tools when we're doing this. So when you've got to work such a large surface, it's really important to find tips and tricks to be able to get through this a little bit easier. And you can see on that right side, as I try to position it correctly, that there's that little air gap. We just want to grind until we minimize that air gap, and eventually the back becomes the same as the front, and then you can check the shape. Here I'm just trying to hold it steady in place just to show that gap. And then here I've already done one edge, and to get that smooth edge and not have an edge that's all jagged, the absolute key is to move your burr pretty quickly. So this isn't sped up footage, this isn't slowed down, this is just 1-to-1 speed. And this helps you skim across those high points. You'll notice that the high points get attacked a lot more, and I'm angling the burr in 2 different directions as well, not just staying linear with it. Now if you've got a lot of little lumps like this, I really abuse this stone to emphasize these points, what you can do is just hold the burr more this direction with the edge and just trim it back, focusing on that front edge, and then you can get the back edge to follow after that. Now if there's a big point, like in this corner over here, I would probably advise that you re-stencil on your oval, but for now we'll just show you this tap removal technique. This is something I do for anything that really sticks out. Instead of sweeping, you just want to tap that point that you want to bring down. And one thing that's really helpful sometimes is this vertical carving. You're dipping the burr straight down, holding the handpiece vertical, and you're just being able to look at that stone as you're carving it. Otherwise you kind of get your view obstructed in a lot of the other positions. So this does help. It's a little bit more like using a vertical flat lap and cabbing wheels. Okay, now that was the boring part. You just want to set your shape and don't worry too much about things like the edges. You can see here, it is quite bumpy, quite jagged, but that's okay because we're going to take that edge way back. Now, typically at this stage, if I'm cabbing a stone, I'll flatten the back. I would want it pretty much as flat as this, but for our purposes, for demonstration purposes, we're not going to worry about that too much, and we'll focus on doming this as the face. Now, I kept thinking of different methods of carving the edges, and so I've made it a little bit skinnier than the stencil, but it's okay, we'll run with it. The best resource and write-up I've seen for cabbing is actually from the IGS, the International Gem Society, and they call it peeling the apple. So if we have a look here, the center point of the face is going to be right about here, right? Now to build up the dome, what we're going to do is looking at this square edge just here. This will be the same all the way around. We want to have a look at the depth of the stone. We'll just go with the stone being this deep. It's a very thick stone. This is definitely not what you're going to have as a typical thickness, but we'll just run with it. So if the stone is set this deep, what you want to do is you want to look like a quarter of the way up, or maybe a third of the way up. And you want to count that as what's going to be the top of your girdle. So when you're setting with the bezel setting, that's where the metal strip is going to go flush up against the side of the stone, and then it'll dip over that dome when it starts. So if we look at my fingernail being about here, what we want to do is the first cut, we want to start it there. So if I just mark it on roughly about here, what we want to do is cut from the bottom edge of this line at a 45-degree angle. So it's hard to draw on a curved surface like this, but a 45-degree angle from there through is going to look something like that, maybe a little bit steeper. At the right angle, it's about right. But what we're going to do is cut from here, essentially, through to about here. It doesn't have to go right to the center. It's really hard to show this on camera, but here to here, and that 40-degree, that entire edge we're going to cut off just straight. It doesn't need to be curved. No worry about curve yet. This is just for starting it out. Now, once we've done that, what you're going to do is going to raise this line. You're going to go up a little bit here, and you're going to come out closer towards that center point. And essentially, we're going to cut between these 2 second texture lines here. So first one to the first one, second one to the second one. Now this is a bit exaggerated. You'll have multiple cuts in between here. You don't need to do it in 2 steps. You can definitely do it in more. But essentially, when you're holding the stone flat like this on the face, you're going to look at doing one that's more of a 45, and then you're going to do one that's more of a 60. So if I can somehow draw that on here, You're basically getting less and less steep as you take cuts across. Eventually, you should just get this little faceted almost looking stone, which we'll do in a second. But because you're doing so many of these little angle changes, eventually you're going to get it doming. And that's when you're going to drop to a higher grit piece and start sweeping across the surface. It's very hard to draw. Definitely refer to the IGS write-up, which I'll link in the description and maybe in a comment, but we'll put it into practice now and I'll show you between each of these little cuts and we'll get the doming right. Alright, so I've done something a little bit tricky here, so hopefully it comes off pretty well. On the four sides of this stone, I've taken it to 4 different stages. So the original starting stage was where it's this square edge, right? Now if we rotate around, you can see that's the first cut, and I've tried to make it as clear as humanly possible, so we'll keep the camera focused. A clear cut, so we've picked this bottom edge as the girdle top, and we've just shot a straight line 45 degrees up. It doesn't have to be 45 degrees. It looks a little bit curved just because the stone curves around. But it's just a straight line with a straight burr, and you can see it falls well short of the center of the stone, which is way over here where that texture ends. Now, if we go across to here, you can see the original cut, the first cut, and then a second cut, which shoots much deeper in towards the center of the stone. Here, straight, first cut, second cut, third cut. If I look at it from the front, you'll be able to see it because it's basically faceted. That's the last cut I did. There's another one, there's another one, there's the original one. And already you're starting to see that it is curving. So you're actually forming the start of the dome with straight lines, which is why I think they call it peeling the apple on the IGS website. Because you can keep the apple round, but you're just taking a straight knife and you're just taking off layers one at a time, and that's all we're doing here. Now unfortunately I can only show 4 because I could only work out a way to do 4 clear distinct sides on this stone. But you can see I've basically hit the center, but it's not quite good enough. You can't have a faceted dome like this, that's for sure. So now I'm at the stage where we round that one off. I've got to, of course, catch the other 3 sides of this stone up. And then we're just going to drop down to a much higher grit. Probably be able to go straight to the 600, though 600 is probably a little bit too fine. It's a little bit slow going. But if you're scared of your dome, and if you're going to stuff it up, then you can always go for the 600. The greatest thing about carving, pretty much the only advantage it's got compared to cabbing wheels and flat laps, which are much better for cabbing, the only advantage I can really think of is you can take it so much slower and do so many little micro adjustments. So if you're not quite happy with the shape, you're not quite happy with the doming, you can make those tiny adjustments and it doesn't disappear super quick. On cabbing wheels, it disappears super quick. Same with the flat lap. But yeah, you can see we're not that far off. You're kind of starting to get that little domey look. You've got some little points here. And the idea of a cab is that every point on the surface is an extremity. So it's an outermost point that speeds up the polishing and everything, gives you that nice glossy dome where you get that perfect reflection off the entire surface. That's what you're aiming for. Alright, and there you go. So now you should be able to, both with light, just pass it across and not see all of those facets. And also you should just rub over it with your finger and just get a feel. Make sure there's nothing lumpy in that direction or this direction. And you've pretty much got it there. I'm not going to polish this one because this is Andamooka matrix and you just want to pre-form it like this and then treat it, and then after that I'll probably stabilize and polish it at the same time and then get it ready for setting. It's actually good because I need to practice setting with Andamooka. It's nice and strong material. I don't think I can crack it by pushing it too hard with the silver bezel. And also it gives me a chance to show you guys the treatment and stabilization of Andamooka matrix as well. We're going to have a lot of treatment and stabilization coming up on the channel for both Andamooka and Fairy Opal from Queensland. So hopefully you'll enjoy that little video on how to get this doming thing right. The theory is still the same whether you're doing it by flat lap, cabbing or carving. There's just some techniques with carving that you need to get the hang of, and it's probably the slowest of them all, by far the slowest of them all. I personally prefer flat laps more than anything else, but that's mostly because I don't get to use cabbing wheels very much because I don't have any myself, whereas the flat laps I can play with those a lot more any day I want. And in a lot of cases, the main difference is the vision, being able to view the stone, and I like the slanted flat lap or the vertical flat lap because you can see it very clearly and exactly what you're removing, whereas carving it's a little bit hard sometimes. Now I didn't mention it in this video, but also dopping the stone can be very worthwhile to get your proportions and lines all correct and your shape. But if you're just really careful with carving, you remove the material so slowly that you don't overshoot. And if you undershoot, you can just do micro changes here and there. So yeah, nice little stone. I'll give it a treatment. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do with the back. If you were to fully finish this stone, you would make sure that the back is flat and you would take a slight edge out of here, because when you do the bezel settings, what you don't want is this to get pinched, and it also gives the solder a little bit of breathing room just in case some spills in. Typically it will be on the inside because you can't really scrape it off and polish it up on the inside that well of the setting, so you just want to take a little edge off. It doesn't need to be anything exact. And I will mention, if you are unhappy with how your doming went and you think you've crept onto your flat edge here, you can always just do a quick run around with a flat again and just make sure that it's nice and square. You should see it's square to the back, minus a little edge that will take off. And where the dome starts, you should see a clear transition from the side to the dome, curving over just like that. And your silver just wants to come around and just hug just above that line. And hopefully I'll be able to show that on the channel soon. Maybe even with this stone. It'll definitely be back because it's not done yet. So until then, I hope that helped, and hopefully you've got some good information out of it. Certainly refer to the IGS article online. It's incredibly good. I refer to it all the time, and it's even for the preparation for this video, I quickly went back and made sure it was still there, and it is still there. It's a really good resource. They post a lot of good information actually, and their steps to doming is one of the better ones. Just practice, practice, practice. Even once you haven't cabbed for a while, you kind of lose touch of it. And if you do anything silly like me and try to show off all 4 stages of the doming on the one stone, that'll also trip you up a bit. It took me a while to get this dome back to normal after that, and even on all 4 sides. So yeah, maybe don't do that. Just do the one cut at a time. Peel that apple, and before you know it, you'll have a nice smooth dome ready for a good polish. Good luck, have fun. See you guys later.